was looking for something else when I saw the bottle of Bragg's liquid aminos. Why was it still there in the middle of all the other cooking ingredients? I wanted to chuck it right in the trash, but it didn't seem like a suitably vicious enough end. It wasn't just an ancient bottle of miracle soy sauce. At that point, it stood for so much more. Okay, I maybe need to back it up a little bit. I was raised in a cult. A cult full of ex-hippies. Okay, you may want to ask me which one. Let me tell you, there were so many. I would be shocked if you'd heard of mine. There's no Netflix documentary, though there's a couple podcasts. There was no 60 Minutes expose when it came crumbling down. Just a couple of press conferences. It wasn't a famous one, not a particularly inspired one, just a cult founded by a gregarious Pentecostal alcoholic. He'd been kicked out of his church and went off to form his own, experimenting until he discovered the language of the Star Child and how to use it. My parents were just two of the many that got taken in by his charisma after throwing off the shackles of convention and not quite finding their way in the world of the esoteric-laden 70s. They were true believers. And in many ways, I know that they still are. You don't spend 50 plus years in a cult and then one day just shake it off. They stuck around through previous lawsuits, changes in leadership, and denied accusations for years. That cult it formed the world that I lived in for the first half of my life, and have spent the last couple of decades trying to undo. Sounds easy, right? Learn some boundaries, try to learn to trust your own instincts, don't join another fucking cult. True story. And then you're good, yeah? It is hard to explain how that kind of upbringing creeps into all kinds of unexpected places and sneaks up upon you when you're least expecting. Enter the bottle of Reaux. Just an old bottle of liquid sodium, yeah? It was to me for many years, until I saw it through the eyes of my partner. We were talking about that phenomenon, how things can taste amazing in a certain context and just disgusting in another one. I told him about how on the last day of church camp as a 12-year-old, after 2 weeks of working in the hot Iowa summer sun for 2 weeks, having plain oatmeal for breakfast, a baked potato with Brad's liquid aminos for lunch, and dinner, they invited us in for a special treat to end our time at camp with. They served us sprouted whole grain bagels, toasted and spread with almond butter and honey. It was uncharacteristically quiet in that room full of teens and preteens as we lost ourselves in a moment of pleasure. Only whimpers and groans sneaking out amongst the smacking jaws. Oh, the joy and ecstasy in the room reverberated as we all dug in. I vowed to treat myself to this experience when I returned home. And after the trip back, and the week it took to assemble the ingredients, I joyfully recreated this treat. I offered the first half to my gourmand of a father, who took a bite, frowned, and shook his head. I was baffled. That couldn't be right. I took a bite. It was not good. I had all the right ingredients. I had toasted it just right. It just wasn't the same. So you know, some things just taste different in different contexts. I ended my story nonchalantly. My partner stared at me silently. Oh my God, you did grow up in a cult. We'd known each other for nearly 2 decades at that point. He never denied that I'd grown up in a cult, but when he met me, I was just barely confirmed blowout, as they called us. I was still soaked in the conditioning that told me that I hadn't grown up in a cult. I had grown up in a very special community with a few bad apples. The Brags wasn't some singular smoking gun. It was just a tiny part of my history that suddenly stood in for all the fucked up things that I had to learn weren't casual life experiences that we can all relate to. After that moment of my partner's revelation, I just went back to living my life. If I spent my time fixated on all the fucked up things that reminded me of the cults, I'd never get a thing done. But later, when I least expected it, there it sat, like a rattlesnake jostled from its slumber. I was frozen in place, crouched in front of the corner cabinet with all the extra spices and seasonings and vinegars. I felt like I was going to cry, or maybe throw up. I stared it down like some kind of Sunday's gunfighter, traveling back in time and pain. I picked it up, walked over to the trash and threw it in. Yes. There was no recipe that justified having this ticking bomb in my kitchen. I stood over it and looked down and started laughing at how silly and huge it felt at the same time. I wanted it gone, but I also did not want a bottle of knockoff soy sauce to have the power to throw me back into the jaws of some old monster, to make my chest tighten and vision go blurry, and make me wonder whether it was a tether of that old power, one of the lingering grips that they still had on me. So, I picked it out of the trash, washed it up, and relocated it to my box of art supplies. I wasn't going to let that haunted bottle of Brags turn into a boogeyman, calling me from the other side of the local dump. I was going to take this moment and make some art.